are going to be live. Everybody's going to be so excited. I know I am. The Disputed Lands, Crowfood's daughter, aka Amanda, the connoisseur, the maestro of the Iron Islands. Let's see. Let's make sure. And let's see if I am on.
I'm not a traitor.
And there we go. There's an ad that will most likely be taken by somebody.
I hear it.
All right. So, okay, first things first. If my mic is 30 times louder, or you can hear me breathing, please let me know right now, because I did a 2-hour chat last night for the Power of the Score, and we didn't find out until the very last minute. I don't know how anybody was even listening to it. So, yeah, if I sound like I'm screaming right now, please let me know, so I can lower my mic and not have to rip this down, because I had to pay the iron price to get my guests with me today. I'm very happy to have on Amanda from the Disputed Lands, as I said, a connoisseur of the Ironborn culture, a maestro. Thank you so much for making time and coming on.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. It's been a while, Con of Thrones.
I know, yeah, and I was lucky enough to be there because of your good graces, and I had a wonderful. We didn't get the fight. You set that up real convenient because after the panel, you're like, oh, you want to go and do it, and I was like, yeah, and then it just so happened to be water dancing happening at the time.
Yeah, I totally set that up. I was like, Serio Farrell, what is that guy's name? Miltos Vermeulen? Anyway, I just went up to Miltos and was like, hey, I really don't want to fight this guy. Could you just, put together a water dancing class right where the fighting is taking place? Oh. And he was totally down. So
he knew.
Oh, yeah.
That I'm an artist. That I only paint in red. Like I was chopping. I mean, it's not even a joke, people. I mean, it's a real deal. So yeah. But no, thank you everybody in the chat. We've got the top shelf chat up there. Thank you to the Patreons and all that. So we're going to be talking about the Ironborn. We're going to be talking about their culture, their creation myth, or how they explain how they came about, which differs within their very culture. But I got to be honest, I'm like a you helped me find God a little bit, but the drowned God, Amanda, I was not interested in Iron. I mean, I was always interested in them. I never hated them, but I was never that intrigued. The Euron, storyline in the novels, I was always intrigued by, and we'll talk about that a little bit. That's obviously very enticing. But to be honest with you, I never dove deep into their gods or their culture. And once I watched one of your videos, I just got really interested in it, and I'm no way as well versed as you, but I really like how it sets them up for the story to be these seafaring people that are always going to have to reap and raid, and it's just perfect. So if you want to let everybody know where they can find you and what type of stuff you cover and all that, and we will jump right into just some of the basics. I'll start with my Viking parallel.
Yeah, so my name's Amanda. I go by Crowfood's daughter, and I do have a ton of Ironborn videos on my YouTube channel. It's called The Disputed Lands, and I'm trying to get back into making videos. I just can't muster up that motivation to actually do them. But if you check those out, you may, find some interesting content. Justin, your comments about, you never found the Ironborn interesting until you saw my videos. It's a common thing that people tell me. And so if you want really, really deep dives into the Ironborn culture and Ironborn religion, it's a good place to go. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Why do you think that is? That is it very common that people I think it's because a lot of people that are show centric, especially, which I'll admit at first I was, I don't think I read the novels until the right before the third season. You don't even, you just have Theon. So you're not really, he didn't even get his own motif until season 2. So, he's essentially a Stark, which, I mean, that's a fascinating story thread itself. I'm not downing on any of it. But do you think it's because of the show-centric people just aren't as drawn to them, their lack of identity? by their very nature of their raiding and pillaging and traveling the high seas, or what is it about it?
Yeah, so the way that they are just written as honestly, people see them as these, raiders that, are not that bright, have a very, very rough. I'm hearing some.
That was me checking my mic. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine. Just raiders and pillagers that are uninteresting. And the show really didn't do a whole lot to help that. They didn't do a whole lot with the storyline. And so when people think about the Ironborn, they're just like, oh, those people. But the cool thing that I found incredibly interesting is the world building that George R.R. Martin did with the Ironborn. If you take a look at the World Book, which is George R. R. Martin has compared it to this Tolkien's Silmarillion, it is his book where he basically gives us the history and mysteries and lore surrounding the creation of, his world. And what I found to be the most interesting thing is, of all the chapters for the Seven Kingdoms, the Ironborn get the most page time. So George R. R. Martin decided that he wanted to provide us with all of this backstory, that all of this backstory was necessary. And so it's really great for somebody who loves history and mythology and trying to piece things together, because we're giving the most information about the Ironborn. And we're also, of all the different progenitors, we're given basically the most information about the Great King. Well, two characters, the Great King and another character called Garth Greenhand. Yeah. So it's cool because you can do a really great analysis of that with what he's been giving you. And so I basically took full advantage of that and performed an analysis and wrote some essays and eventually put them to video.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think it's interesting what you said, because obviously I've got a World of Ice and Fire as well, and that book exists for the reason of this stream. Essentially, it's like you said, it's about his world, and they don't do sub creation just to do sub creation. Tolkien does it because he does believe stories, and there is some truth to that. I love the power of stories, but he can get very literal with it about how stories will literally come. Like, he was like with C.W. Lewis, he's like, hey, stop it, Narnia is gonna happen. But no, like he didn't really do that. He just bitched at him a lot about yeah, if you ever. But anyways, it's important to know about the I'm gonna go ahead and refer to all religion as creation myth here. No offense to everybody, that's not, but just for the sake of this stream, because we will be using real world religions as well. In theory, we do have to just accept it for that. For this, it's no disrespect, people. I think the people here will understand. But yeah, it's like the people, the way in which they craft their lore. Or George crafts it for them, but we believe that they're doing it. It's very telling of how George envisions them, right? Because of the creation myth that he gives them, the origins, the religions in which they embrace, the spirituality, the culture, the society, all of these aspects. This is what forms their civilization, and I think the Iron Islands have the most because they have their own gods. I mean, like, they have the least amount of like stuff, but like the most amount of like gods of their own, like rules of their own. They're all kind of crappy rules for them, but you know what I mean? Like they're very much so. I don't say they're not individuals. They're different. They have buried their origins at the bottom of a primordial water to make sure that they cannot be, which I want to talk to you about because there's some dispute about that. But they've tried to separate themselves in methodology and in creation. Their ways and the way that they came about. So that book is so great for stuff like that because it does matter. Yeah, I definitely love it. And as you were talking about the Grey King and all that, I'll just go ahead and do my quick Viking analogy. This is what kind of got me interested because I do love to study the actual, the Danes, and I like to, go and make, what I consider to be smart Viking videos that get like a few hundred views. But, I noticed that the first at surface, level, you will usually elate the Ironborn to the Vikings, right? Most people would, I would think, especially if we're just talking about a casual viewer, which I think is important to take into consideration because it's a high concept series, and it's people are meant to be able to take away what they get at face value. So I was looking into really once you got me interested in them, and I started to see how they were crafted, and their ways are just so set so they are not going to ever embody or embrace a farming, a agricultural lifestyle. They are always going to be raiding. They're always going to go about things in a way that they're never going to assimilate to the mainland when as we saw with what happened in the Riverlands and so forth. So essentially what I took away from it is that yes, there's a lot of similarities from the 8th and 9th century when you have the original invasion by the Vikings in the great in the great heathen army. And I think that really what George was trying to do, and let me know if you agree, is he was essentially depicting them as they were depicted by Saxon monks, like which would be understandably so, because these horrible men, in their opinion, came and did some pretty horrible things. But in all reality, Vikings are very different from from the Ironborn. They were very quick to assimilate. Within 2 generations they assimilated. They were very quick to change their belief systems, and for better or worse, and they didn't have to change the way they went about things. They were always farming people. They were always they were going there for better soil and so forth. So they really share a few I would say just similarities when it comes to the actual conversion, when it comes to them coming over, and then after that it kind of dies away. Do you think that's a fair analogy? Or
Yeah, I do. I actually agree 100%. I tend to think that George R. R. Martin utilized the kind of cliche outlook for Vikings, how they're depicted in maybe Hollywood, and how they would probably, like you said, be seen by like their enemies as just these heathen raiding warriors that do not farm or are not a pastoral society. But in reality, the Vikings absolutely they did farm. They did herd. They did trade. But basically, what we get with the Ironborn is more of the quintessential cliche depiction that we get maybe like in Hollywood, or if you just say the word Vikings, what actually comes to your mind. You get basically what that's the Ironborn. It's a little bit of a simplified thing. And the cool thing about that you're saying is that the Vikings, they were able to assimilate, whereas the Ironborn are so resistant to assimilating, and they have tried over thousands of years to incorporate the faith of the seven, and it has never worked. There's a couple houses amongst the Ironborn that do follow the faith of the seven, but when you look at the majority of that culture, they have time and time again resisted the Andal influence. So
yeah, and I think it's interesting because too, I by no means think it's like a mess up on George. George thinks Vikings are got the horn hats and all that. I think it's on purpose. I think he embraces that because there's so many layers to them that that's when you look for reformers, I guess, or I would call them pragmatic people that were like, hey, let's just not live on this shitty island, like nobody, I mean, Matt, is it their belief system? I mean, let's get into it. Like, what about them has made them so stubborn? Because I mean, who's been the great reformer? There's somebody that I know you named in the notes that did try to take them, through the desert, but they just don't want to go, man. They are stuck in their ways. I mean, is it because it's so beneficial? Because it doesn't seem that way.
Well, they're a very proud people. And I know that the most recent reformer was probably going to be Quillan Greyjoy. And he did things like marry a Greenland wife, and was actually very, he was very friendly with the crown, and he did a lot to do away with some of the Ironborn traditions, like reaving and thraldom and taking salt wives. But yeah, it's been attempted several times throughout the Ironborn history, and basically what we get are these people that try to make the Ironborn more progressive and more in line with the Greenlands. And usually it's just one or two. The Ironborn become very resistant, and they become very resentful to those rulers or to those people that are trying to make changes, and they eventually get overthrown, and we get kind of like a regression back to the old way. And that's one of the things that basically happens between Quillan and his son Balon. Is Quillan did all these things to make the Ironborn more progressive. When Balon takes over, especially during the Greyjoy Rebellion, you get basically this they're reverting back to the old way. They just have this deep desire to return to the old way. And it's very interesting because many of the aspects of the old way haven't actually occurred for many thousands of years, and we're seeing some return to that, like the Kingsmoot, for instance. A Kingsmoot we see in the with the Victarion and Aeron chapters, and Asha as well. We hear discussion and we actually see it happen, but the last Kingsmoot that occurred prior to that hadn't occurred for thousands of years. So that's very interesting, because that is one aspect of the old way that we have not seen for a very, very long time.
Because it's called
that
by
actually
the gods, technically, right? Like,
well, yeah, the prophets.
Yeah,
the
we
prophets.
have prophets again, or as I call them, Euron's bitches. Or victims.
They are. I mean, you can call them your.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I mean, it is just so horrible. But
Yeah.
I guess since we actually hear, I mean, what is their religion? Like, we have the Drown God and the Storm King. Or the Storm God. I'm sorry, and the Grey King. But yeah. So, what is the relationship with the Storm God, the Drown God, and then the Grey King? Like, who do they universally follow? Is it universally just the duality with the Storm God and the Drown God, and some buy in the Naga and the Grey King and all this? Or is there some like laissez-faire moderates over there? Or
Yeah. So when you actually take a look at how the Ironborn portray the Storm God and Drown God, the Ironborn are they believe in two gods, but they're basically monotheistic in the same way that Christianity is. They believe in basically God and the devil, and the Drown God is basically their god, is who they worship, and the Storm God is this malign deity who stands in opposition to the Drowned God, and he sends storms, which, if for a seafaring culture, storms are kind of a bad thing. So basically he is that malign deity that sends the weather that opposes their culture. And so the Drowned God is very interesting, because we can actually see some of the different aspects of that in the Aeron chapters, because we have a priest of the Drowned God who's a POV character. We learn through the Aeron chapter that, like Christianity, they also perform two different types of baptism. One is very similar to the way that people are baptized in a Christian church, where water is just kind of poured over them when they're very young, and that's called being given to the Drowned God. But there's also another different type of baptism that is much more involved and it's much more scary, and that is being fully given to their God. And that is when they are fully drowned and resuscitated with a very basic rudimentary form of CPR. So
I really like that, because there's that pragmatic approach to it that it tells me that if I'm looking to, sell some snake oil, that maybe if I learn how to, successfully bring people back every single time and bring them to near death with a drowning, that's going to give them some lucid, cognitive behavior, that I might be able, get a racket going. But also, there is this side of it, that there is so much in contemporary belief systems that has to do with exactly what that entails, is this resurrection, is this being born again, rising from the primordial waters. That goes back, it links to their creation myth too. I find it to be a little bit fascinating, because scientifically we can see what happens to the brain when that happens. He's pulling a John the Baptist, right? I mean, it's essentially there's this resurgence, right? And it's almost perfect for Euron, who might want to play the Jesus role. I don't know if that's going too far, but I think it's pretty fair to say that he's got a God complex, and he doesn't even believe in him, supposedly. But, they've got this newfound spike in beliefs, at least for this era. I mean, I don't know the last time that we had this many prophets, and especially people like Euron going around, that, like we were talking about before we got on here, is just, he goes about his saintly behavior in a very odd way. But I was very drawn in by their religion, because it does set them up so they have a certain amount of divine right, to rule. Like, it sets them up so the King's Moot is technically called a prophet, is given the A-OK, and they go. But also, if you don't even have that, you do have that the procedure in which you just spoke about. So it gives you that little bit of democracy for, like, the pragmatic reasons, meaning, like, you want to have a say in who sits on your throne. But also, it's nice that when you do have somebody that their bills are signed by a divine right to rule, that's always important for kings and stuff like that. So it's got a mix of, like, all the greatest elements, that if you want to be, like, a powerful ruler, it's like, because there's nothing better than, it's like, well, I'm God's choice. And so they get a little bit of both, right? It's like they revert back. It's like, all right, King's Moot, time for democracy. And it's like, dunk 'em, time for, getting that God in there. And I don't mean to minimalize it, but it does have a pragmatic, function to it. And it's very telling. And also their gods, too, from their very creation, tell me if I'm wrong, but I mean, they speak to them being weaker by the further they get from the sea, correct?
Yeah, well, the Ironborn definitely believe that their strength comes from their sea, that their strength comes from their ships. And you can actually hear that or see that being played out in the Asha chapters, where, they're very resistant to traveling away from the sea, because that is where their strength lies. And there are places on in the Iron Islands, specifically on Great Wick, where some of the people do not even can live their whole lives without even setting eyes on the ocean, and they're viewed as being backwards and crabbed and queer. So they definitely do see those people who are on the Greenlands as a weaker in that sense, because they are not Ironborn. The Ironborn come from a society where it is a much more, it's much harsher. The life on the islands is tough, bleak, and it's short. So they definitely do see themselves as superior in that aspect, where they do view themselves as tougher, but they still acknowledge that their strength comes from the sea. And there's one Ironborn specifically, and it said that, and he did some really great things. Well, according to the Ironborn, yeah, it's great, but
what do you mean, Amanda? Wait a minute.
Well, no, he did a lot of. I'm sure this guy had a lot, but no, he did a lot of conquest on the mainland, and it said that his writ ran wherever you could smell seawater. And so it's basically kind of insinuated that despite all of the conquest that he did, he still stayed fairly close to where his strength lied. So that's also interesting as well. But
well, yeah, and their isolation too, like we were speaking about a moment ago, that it's, why isn't there more reformers? Because again, like I don't think they're doing that well. Like Balon, I don't think that was a great call. I think the other guy was going in the better direction, but that's just, that's my politics. But it's because, if you're, if you're throwing a fit over in Lordsport, Pike's right there. I mean, you're not able to go like in mainland Westeros, like, if you're in the Riverlands, you can go north and find the old gods. You can find people of similar minds. Here it's like, it's pretty much calling out somebody in a locked room. So the isolation helps them with their control. It's just, it is a little bit fascinating. You do see hints of Euron being willing to sell the crown and really taking the kind of my approach, like looking at it is more of a scheme than something of a real belief system in his mind, like that his divinity or the perceived divinity would be useful to him, and then he would maybe sell that chair for one in the mainland real quick. At least, I think there's at least evidence that could go down. I mean, it's Euron. There's evidence that he could do it. He doesn't really have a moral compass. But since they have some disputes, right, that they came from some people actually don't believe that they came up from the swells of the water, because there's a certain benefit to that, because it sets them apart from the Andals, the First Men, the Rhoynar, right? Like that alleviates that problem for them. But others believe that they might have came from the west, the Sunset Sea. Can you give a little bit of perspective on that? Because I find that to be very interesting, and what would be the benefit for those naysayers that they didn't come from those primordial waters?
Yeah, so there's actually a great quote in the World Book, which I'm just going to go ahead and quote because it's right here in front of me. It says, according to their faith, the Ironborn are a race apart from the common run of mankind. We did not come to these holy islands from godless lands across the seas, the priest Sauron Salttongue once said. We came from beneath those seas, from the watery halls of the drowned god who made us in his likeness and gave to us dominion over all the waters of the earth. Even among the Ironborn, there are some who doubt this and acknowledge the more widely accepted view of an ancient descent from the First Men, even though the First Men, unlike the later Andals, were never a seafaring people. Certainly, we cannot seriously accept the assertions of the Ironborn priests who would have us believe that the Ironmen are closer kin to fish and merlings than the other races of mankind. So, yeah, there is a little bit of some confusion as to what the Ironborn were originally and where they came from, because we do have this very ancient line of very ancient civilization. But the First Men, it is well known, they were never a seafaring people. So the question is, how did they get there? How did they get there? And the Ironborn believe that they actually came from beneath the water, that they came from the sea, and that they were just there. But there's a couple things in the myth that support not only a First Men descent, but there's also things that support possibly being contacted by seafarers from another land. Now, if you take a look at the legend of the Great King, specifically when he slayed Naga, there is hints that the Iron Islands were subject to the Hammer of the Waters as well, because the myth of Naga mentions that he was a sea dragon who drowned whole islands in his wrath. Now, the idea of drowning whole islands is huge. I mean, to literally drown an island, we're looking at possibly a raising of the sea level. Okay. Now, the Hammer of the Waters is stated to have occurred in two different places, the Arm of Dorne and also the Neck. Now, the Iron Islands lay at the exact same latitude as the Neck. It's literally right there. So if the neck, and now the neck wasn't fully drowned, but we do understand that there was a raise in the sea level, and the neck is partially drowned. So it's very possible that the areas along the coastline, the sea level was actually much lower at one point. So it's very quite possible that the Iron Islands were at one point much closer to the mainlands, or possibly even connected at some portions. And the Hammer of the Waters basically made a much larger delineation of the between the two
which
land
would
masses.
put the children in their creation story. That's
yes.
not good for them.
Yes, yeah, it would actually put the children of the forest as being part of the causing of this drowning of whole islands.
That is heresy right there.
That is. But when you actually look at the myth of the Grey King, it's very interesting because he is actually a figure that's doing a lot of things to literally hurt trees. So if you look at the myth of the Grey King, it said that he brought fire to the earth by taunting the storm god, who lashed out with a thunderbolt, causing a tree to burn. So in one myth, he is literally he's literally killing a tree. He's making the tree burn. Mm-hmm. In another myth, he is carving a long ship from the pale wood of a demonic tree that fed on human flesh. So,
it's just bad craftsmanship. It's a poor choice. Well, how big is the Great King depicted to be? Much larger than a regular man, right? I mean, I know he's a demigod of sorts. We don't know, but I mean, in your opinion, like, what are we looking at with the Great King here?
Well, we're going to go back to that in just a second, but specifically with the Children of the Forest, if you think about a pale wood that feeds on human flesh, we're definitely looking at a werewood. So in the Great King's myth, he's definitely killing werewoods in his myth as well. And then when you look at the tale of Naga, there's various theories throughout the fandom that Naga was probably not a sea dragon and was most likely made of wood. It was either a werewood grove or a werewood boat. But either way you look at it, the Grey King is again slaying trees in his myth. So when we're looking at the Children of the Forest with the Hammer of the Waters and the Storm God and everything that occurred there, it's quite possible that the Children of the Forest were actually connected to that, which is also interesting. And I just wanted to get out that thought before it.
Oh, no. Yeah, the arch, that's what, because you were the first to bring this to my attention. And because, I found it fascinating because George, I think I spoke about this on our panel. I said, George is always one to, and I didn't say this part, but it's kind of a big fuck you to people like me. Cause like, I'm always looking to like explain away things. And George will be like, it's like, okay, well, there's all this foolishness happening. Like, and people believing in, all these belief systems that are, a bunch of nonsense, a bunch of tomfoolery over there. And then, like magic's not real. Bam, somebody's resurrected. Bam, dragons are in there. Now we got bones for Naga. So that's what was my that was what I was caught up on. I was like, all right, because like, okay, the serpent, whether it's a sea or land, it's a dragon being slayed by a demigod of something. This is in almost all especially Saxon tales and I mean really everything. If you do put it to snakes, as we've talked about before. I mean, there's really no origin story without like some sort of this scenario. Some situation that is an incarnation of this, like to some sort. So I was like, okay, this is par for the course. They're seafaring people. They get a freaking kraken or they get a sea serpent. It doesn't matter. You know what I mean? They just got to slay a beast but the beast also has to be a world killer or a world builder. Because they must take domain and have agency over the land. That is man being man. In our bullshit ape stories that we tell. We're like, and then we took it, but this, and then we talk up it's like if you fight a guy, you always say that he was 10 times bigger than he was. Or like, yeah, you didn't see what I did. But so Naga, I was like, okay, but there's some proof because, it's literally now what we have left because supposedly the storm god sunk the rest, but make the pillars of over there on Wick. So it's almost like metaphorically the pillars of their belief system as well. But you're telling me that there's a chance. See, how could it be bone? It seems like that you could distinguish.
Yeah, so it's said in the myth that the drowned god had changed their bones, the Naga's bones, to stone. So what we have right here is not necessarily a skeleton. We have a fossilized skeleton, so we have a stone skeleton. So instead of having actual bone here, it's been calcified and it's been turned to stone. Okay. However, one of the really interesting things that we find out about werewoods, and it's like a really weird little piece of information that's been put into the series that doesn't have any implications yet so far, is when Jaime is visiting the Blackwood Keep, they mention that werewoods never rot, they only turn to stone. So we learn that werewoods turn to stone. So we have these stone ribs. They're not actually bone anymore. What we have is pale stone. Okay. And when we are actually given descriptions of Naga, we're given descriptions of Naga in 2 different chapters. One's an Aeron chapter and one's a Victorian chapter. And in both instances, they describe Naga, Aeron does and Victorian does, as looking like the trunks of pale trees.
Yes.
Okay. And not only that, we don't actually have pillars, but we have an arch. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's beneath the arch of Naga's bones. So we have basically this very symmetrical arched thing of little area with these large stone-like pale things.
Yeah.
And
I just meant pillars in the sense because like, the arch would hold up, like they're the foundation,
right.
That is a tree shape as well.
Absolutely. Well, and it's very, very interesting because when George repeats something, and this is something that like Aziz always mentions in his podcast with History of Westeros, when George repeats something, it's usually setting something up for the reader. And so what happened is George used 2 separate points of view. So 2 different characters have both compared Naga's bones as looking like the trunks of great pale trees. And not only that, but in the Great King myth itself, it said in one version that his crown was made of Naga's teeth. However, in another variation that we've gotten, I think it was from the World Book, it said that that the Great King's crown was made from driftwood. Okay. So in one variation, it's Naga's teeth. In another one, it is driftwood. And then when we get the towering priest, Galen Whitestaff, we see another confusion in the myth. In one version, it is made of his staff is made of Naga's bones. Yes. However, in another version, the staff is made of weirwood. So again, we're getting this repeated confusion between artifacts of Naga and also wood. And the Iron Islands also has a house that has a very peculiar sigil. We have a house stone tree, and their sigil is literally a stone tree. So we may actually be getting another hint in that sigil of the Ironborn as well.
Yeah. I mean, George, you don't do anything for no reason. And these conflicting views make sense, though, because the Maesters say it's driftwood, right?
Yes, yeah.
The Maesters are dismissive of everything.
Very
So that adds up. Now, who says that it's more, in line with the when it's somebody, a prophet or a priest of the drowned god, like that is going to be, it's all about who said it, when they said it, who they were saying it to. So I think that the conflicting, opinions and descriptions and depictions of it are vital, because that, I think I've heard people say it before that, and it speaks true. If the Maesters dismiss something, it's time to look into it. That's like when you got to start looking into things is when they start dismissing them. So, it's, I think that's very interesting. I think that House Stormtree is a little bit too on the nose, but man, I think they nailed it. They nailed it. They got it. But that's like when he's injecting that into the story, and I think that he definitely started building more. With Euron and Damphair, obviously because of the split in the books, and he needed to fill POVs. And I don't necessarily think that these threads go anywhere that leads to the Night King, or that leads to Azor Ahai, or that's the biggest mistake I feel in A Song of Ice and Fire. Is something that I am very familiar with, is story threads. And one of the biggest disappointments is when all threads don't lead to, like the show had to rush all the threads where we won't even get into it. We know it wasn't great. We know but it's always going to have to splinter off, and people, they kind of fade away, and you feel maybe sometimes a lack of finality with some people. It gets 10 times worse when you do it in 6 episodes and everybody ends up at King's Landing and they're like, I'm going to sail west. I'm going to go be, the Lady of Winterfell. I guess I'm going to the wall. You know what I mean? It's just contrived bullshit at that point. But, not all roads lead to that main conflict resolution, and who's to even say that's the main conflict resolution? But you get what I mean? Like, I love Euron's stuff. I think he's a madman that is just a torture. He's a rapist. I mean, he's just a fucking. I'm sorry, I shouldn't swear even though it's my channel with you on. But he is just so cruel, and he is just he fancies himself a god when he's able to inflict pain on people, because the gods inflict pain, right? So like he sees it the same way, and he sees that impact. But I believe he's I just want somebody to put a sword through his head. I think he's a dynamic character in the books, but I see no. I love to read a good essay that somebody spent a lot of time on that is about Euron, in his Valyrian armor, and him going all the way, and it's very cool, and it's awesome, and it's sometimes really good writing. There's no way in hell that's happening though. There's just no way in hell. I think that, I think that he's willing to explore the Iron Islands because he found himself there. That's how George writes. He's a gardener. He didn't plan it all. He thought this was going to be a short story. Not the story they never finished. You know what I mean? So like he is fascinated. He is passionate about these people. He's added far more layers than he ever thought to them. And I find it, not everything has a reason in the sense of it leads to, the Night King, or not the Night King, but the others in the book, or the, any type of prophecy specifically. But this is a story about power, where it derives from, and family, and beliefs, belief systems, and how people control, and how people get by throughout these institutions, and both secular and religious. So it totally fits the message of the they call it the mystery box in writing. It's like sometimes you don't open the mystery box, you just let it be, because it's better to have the idea of what it could be, not to show it. Nobody likes to hear how the Jedis get their midichlorians, right? Nobody likes to see under the veil. But when you talk about the Storm King, there are a few different stories that do they also are in conflict with each other as well. He ruled for 1,000 years, right? He had a whole bunch of sons. In your opinion, because I know you have a comparison with Garth the Green Hand, again, another example of the Iron Islanders, and Cardinal Doomsday did have a question for you, if you thought they'd ever become extinct, essentially because of their inability to change. But they just seem to embrace the worst aspects of everything. Like in one of your videos, you mentioned it. His description is that of a dead man, right?
The drowned god, yes, yeah,
And then the Grey King too is not a handsome figure, though.
No, he's not a handsome figure.
None of them are.
His hair and eyes and his beard and his very skin had turned, had turned as gray as his hair and beard. So you have a picture of a literal gray man, which is very interesting. What the author is actually trying to purvey with that description. It's very much a description that is in line with, the Ironborn culture, which is death. That's why you get all the reaping symbolism. It's why you get we do not sow, and we have the Lord Reaper of Pike, and we have House Harlaw with scythes, and we have House Drum, who has a skeleton for a hand, and we have other Ironborn houses where we have nooses. It's very much in line with death, and the cool thing with the sigil is actually that of House Sunderly, which is the symbol the symbol of the drowned god, and it's just a dead man, a dead drowned man with fish nibbling at his feet. And when we see the Forsaken chapter, that is how Euron describes the drowned god. Who would want to worship that? A dead man a dead drowned man with fish nibbling at his feet. So we learned that
never die. So
but what is dead may never die. So we quickly come to understand that this depiction of their drowned god is actually most likely similar to the kind of the same symbolism that you get with Jesus dying on the cross, because you see this death and resurrection. And that's what the Ironborn are actually doing with the drowned priests, is they're basically performing a death and resurrection. So they're basically reenacting possibly what might have occurred to become very, very significant for their religion, which is very interesting as well. So
it gives, and it's very interesting that they've chosen to have like that, them out of all people that they're very much so were in control. You think that priests wouldn't be something they'd have. They seem more primitive and primal, that they wouldn't, like, because that seems like a very, like, because it's a very Andal thing, right? Which I don't know if it's just in my head, but that seems very
priests.
Yeah. So
no. I mean, you have priests of every religion. Like, for instance, you have your red priests of the original.
Well, the first men don't have priests. Like, so, like, I just like, I see them like just separating themselves from them is what I'm getting. Like the free folk, the Northerners. You know what I mean? Like, I think that they're like, we're just not these guys on the side island that might have been connected. So I find it interesting that they do have priests. I know plenty of religions have it, but like not the ones that the one that they could be most connected to, the old gods. It just them being such elemental people as well. I find it to be a good choice. I think it's a nice layer because you get this. It's definitely for Euron's story thread, but the priests definitely all have an agenda that's pretty clear. Damphair, in my opinion, his visions that we got in the sample chapters seem like a whole lot of PTSD to me. I mean, he's talking for both. When he's not having a conversation, he's doing both sides himself. I mean, he's a man of empty faith himself. I mean, I don't know. Like, am I taking a bad read on that? But I feel like he's just a broken person, and that he really does not have, like, he has this drive to continue doing what he's doing, but I think deep down he doesn't believe.
Yeah, so let me first respond to what you were saying about the drowned priests real quick, and then we're going to go back to Aaron's visions.
I threw like 8 things at you, didn't I?
Yeah, it's okay.
Robert,
it's okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that, Robert.
So
I'll answer the first 5 that you threw at me.
Yeah, and so my brain's a little bit more chaotic, so you might have to remind me the next thing I need to touch on. But we're going to talk about
nobody should have to do what I asked you to do.
Okay. So the cool thing with how George R. R. Martin wrote the drowned priest, because you were mentioning, it's really cool that the Ironborn even have priests, because they're very, very, very simple society as far as their faith goes. And it's interesting because, the mainland does not necessarily had not originally had priests as well. But the very basic thing is that most religions, they do have priests. They have some sort of religious leader or religious organization to how they express their faith. But what is cool with what George R. R. Martin did is he did make them very primitive in that manner. So the drowned priests, they do not wear shoes. They do not even have a written word. Everything is passed down through word of mouth. So everything learned, another person has taught them, and they've had to memorize it. The drowned priests, they wear very primitive clothing. It's supposed to mimic flowing fronds of seaweed, and it's supposed to kind of harken back to that drowned man aspect. So they just wear like, what is it called, like sackcloth or what have you, in shades of green. They don't wash their hair. They don't even have places of worship where they actually go. Wherever they go, people are supposed to take them in. And so it's very cool because there is no written word. There are no organized places of worship. It's just these wandering people.
It's
that
like a wanderer from the Norse, but it's also got elements of a Christian like monk, especially the Irish monks that, by the way, make it everywhere before everybody in history. They just leave a little artifact. But no, that's very interesting, because you are right. They make sure to make it rough and gritty as well. What do you think the reason for that? Are they just not learned people?
It's the legend of the Grey King. So what we were talking about earlier with the legend of the Grey King, it said there's a good possibility that the Grey King was not originally from that area. And the reason why I tend to believe that is when we look at the legend itself, it said that he had taught men to not only weave nets, but also make sails, and he also carved the first longship. So basically, he has taught and provided the Ironborn culture with all of the implements to become a seafaring people. Now, it's quite possible that the Grey King was awesome. He was like Benjamin Franklin, and he was being very innovative and creating all these things. But the most rational explanation for the Grey King doing all these things is that he came from a seafaring culture and brought the technology with him. And so it's very possible with the legend of Naga that the Grey King had come to the islands on a great storm, possibly the Hammer of the Waters. So with the drowned priest tradition of not having a home and people having to take them in and having to show them, courtesy and guest right and all those things, it is quite possibly a throwback to their original drowned man, who was probably a stranger in a sense, or a wanderer who had come to the islands and needed to be brought into their society. So yeah, I do believe that a lot of the things that occur with the drowned God religion have to do with this one major event that was very, very important to their culture, and it basically shaped their way of life from there on. So, yeah.
So during the Age of Heroes, we have the Grey King, and we have his, I know he has some brothers, and so forth, but, the Age of Heroes, or whatever they end up calling it, we do have some pictures, spoiler alert, they came out months ago, of even Starks on what look to be long boats. What type of depiction of the Ironborn do you think that we're going to get there, and how much, because it looks like the Starks are essentially Vikinging it up.
Yeah, so
they're not supposed to.
Yeah, so I don't know if you can hear my dog in the background. Can you hear my dog?
Yeah, I just thought it was.
Is it bad?
No, it's fine. Yeah. You're fine.
Okay. I might have to go and check on her. So now that I was super, super incredibly pumped when I saw those pictures come out from the prequel stuff, and now what's interesting with the whole Starks on ships thing is that it's quite possible that a lot of the progenitors that we learn about, a lot of these myths and legends that we see referred to in the storyline, are all part of a monomyth, which it basically states that there was one person, which the concept is basically there was one person where each culture views them in a different way. And so their myth is told in a slightly different fashion. And so the best example that I can give with that would be Daenerys. With Daenerys, we see her do a lot of different things every place she goes. And every place she goes, and she travels very, very far. You know, she starts out in Pentos. She crosses the Dothraki Sea. She crosses the Red Waste. She goes, she goes to Karth. She goes to Slaver's Bay. Eventually, she's probably going to be going to Westeros. She'll probably stop somewhere. No, yeah. Spoiler alert.
Spoiler.
Spoiler.
No.
Yeah, but each place she goes, she does something a little bit different. And everything place she goes, she does something that's fairly significant, and she gains another moniker, right? So we have Khaleesi of the Great Brass Sea, we have the Unburnt, we have the Breaker of Trains, the Mother of Dragons, and so it's quite possible that each and every culture that she actually comes into contact is going to remember her in song and myth in a different way. So 5,000 years from now, 5 to 10,000 years from now, from the events of that storyline, we may have one culture that has this myth of a mother of dragons. However, another culture may have another myth of a completely different person. Maybe a savior, like a Christ-like figure who had freed them from slavery. Or maybe that culture is going to view her differently, and she's going to be an evil, malign figure.
How would the Dothraki take her? As I guess as a deity? I mean, like
she broke the rules, but
the Unburnt. They all broke the rules.
She became a cow. She's the first woman to become a cow. She became the Dothraki value strength. So they're probably going to see her as this awesome, this awesome, female messiah who, had an amount of legend, and, but Slaver's Bay.
All those dudes, though, you know what I mean? It's not the best way to go about it. They can clean that up. Depends who's writing the story.
But the take home here is that each culture is possibly going to view her and have a different name, for her, 5 to 10,000 years in song and story. And so the actual semblance between those two myths can be, or those handful of myths can be barely recognizable because of how things have changed. And George R. R. Martin, I've mentioned this in the past, he likes to play on a concept called euhemerism, which is the historical theory of mythology, which states that, the legends and myths are actually based on actually things that happened in history and that actually occurred. It's just that things have been changed and conflated and have, evolved over time to where it's very difficult to ascertain what has actually happened.
Prehistory doesn't. You have to. Culture changes so much at a certain point. Like we have to look. We go back 600 years. We can't speak the English that we speak. It's maybe even 300. We'll start to have trouble. And it's insane. And I think what you're saying, it's not a chance of it. I mean. If we were to, just keep acting like this is real, I mean, I think that's for sure happen, because like every culture does define her differently, and there's a chance that people get merged, because that's what happens. I believe most of, Ragnar, was most likely a combination of King Horik, of a whole bunch of people, it's very, you consolidate, because it makes your history, especially when it's spoken word, because big surprise, it's not the best way to keep track of things. So you gotta, you gotta shorten up that list, and it's easier to explain things away. It's how we get great man history. It's like, probably if Napoleon was never born, there'd still be some, there's better arguments for some, but I like to stay away from big great man history, because the idea that single people change everything about the world, when it's like not even one single war that changes anything. It's a whole plethora of things. So I love that whole idea. Maybe somebody will be like Khaleesi, who didn't pay her bill, the one who never pays, like she ran out on a diner or something like that. They might not have a good idea of her. But no, I mean, like it's Slaver's Bay, from Volantis to Karth. Karth is probably gonna have some odd tales of her, right? with the
Yeah,
House of Undying and all
absolutely.
that. I mean, there's so much stuff. And there'll
Exactly.
be tales at the same time, maybe about a the White Wolf, Jon Snow, or
Hmm.
you can have all these tales too. And look at what's already happened with Arthur Dane. Like all the great theories and stuff about him, but a great name, a great house, a great sword that even had that right amount of not like practical metal in it. It's got a little bit of magic. It's got a little bit of meteor stone in it. He's got his Excalibur. He's got his great name. He's got his great skill set. So it's like he has to mean something. He's the
Hmm.
sword of the morning. They already gave him the moniker. So yeah, I love that idea. We'll probably wrap it up in a little bit here, but if you had to make any guess, it would just do a few rapid fires for you, Amanda, of where they came from, other than emerging from the seas like a leviathan. Where would you
Yeah.
see?
So, and let me just finish that thought really quick. So, because I still got it going on in my head. So the thing with the Starks on ships is that it's quite possible that when we have those Starks on ships, what we are still getting is that legend of this, fabled hero. And so it's quite possible that when we have stories of like Brandon the Builder, or possibly the original Night King, or all these other characters that are mentioned throughout history, what we are getting is a monomythic version of the same person. So when we see Starks on ships, I got excited because I may actually be getting my Grey King storyline. Um,
Oh, that would be great.
yes, yes. So that was incredibly, for me. It was incredibly exciting, and that's one of the things that I do focus on a lot, is identifying these different monomyths, and how what George R. R. Martin is trying to purvey in all these different monomythic variations, and what actually occurred during the original Long Night. So those Starks on ships, I was incredibly excited. I tweeted it out. I was super happy. Now, you were the next question was, what are some things that help us to identify that there may have been some contact from other peoples from like another seafaring culture.
Yeah.
Um,
Sunset Sea, Summer Islanders,
yes.
something. You know what I mean? I mean,
Okay.
the fact they don't trade is
House
insane to me.
Farwood.
Okay.
House Farwood is going to be excellent example. So House Farwood retains a memory. It's why they actually found the Lonely Light and that island chain. They're actually trying to find something else, and they are retaining a memory of something that can be found across the Sunset Sea, and it's very mythicized for them. We see that being mentioned at the King's Moot. It's like, follow me. We will travel beyond the lands of the Sunset Sea. We will find this place where every man will become a king and every woman a queen. And so they are actually retaining this memory of some sort of possible contact that might have occurred, and that is what is actually being purveyed to the reader, is this ancient memory of something that had occurred. And so it's said that the first men were never seafaring people. So when the Great King had came with his knowledge, and had also brought about the seafaring culture, that is possibly another hint as well, because it said that the first men were never a seafaring people. So if they were never a seafaring people, how do we get this culture? It
How do they
most
get to Bear
likely came.
Island? How do they get to, what I mean?
Yeah,
It's like what they didn't go on
exactly.
any. I mean, by seafaring, do they mean like okay, like that's like they're
So yeah, and that's another good thing we probably need to touch on, is the difference between an ocean going vessel and a coastal vessel.
mm-hmm.
Coastal vessels and ocean going vessels that can travel far distances
Yeah,
are often different in construction, and
yeah,
so it's possible to actually get to fairly close by near areas that are kind of like coastal areas in ships that are meant for those shorter distances that are not crossing deep oceans and seas. And so it's possible that the first men had, some sort of vessels that could travel very, very short distances. I'm
Shore
sure that,
huggers is
yes,
what,
shore
yeah,
huggers,
because
basically
yeah,
the
that
same stuff you'd see on kind of like a river, except they might have had some sails, or they might have had some different type of oarsmen, or
mhm,
different, some different variations on that. But actual ocean going vessels, there's a little bit of some differences in
mhm.
technology that need to occur in
That's where you get the
order for something.
Vikings. The Danes were
Yes,
innovators with the boats. They could go in
exactly.
both rivers and then go out in the open ocean, because people would, like you said, and it makes sense. The pictures we've seen, I like that idea. Because it's impossible they don't use anything, especially when they literally have islands that they need to go to. But shore hugging, it's they
Hmm.
used to navigate like that as well, because they would just they would never go that far from the shore. They would for multiple reasons. So yeah, I think that's very very. I think it's almost certain that I'll cross my fingers that you do get the Grey King, because I mean, all the events, I always say that like prophecy is never literal, but we should be able to look at the events of the Long Night, and we should be able to, like the one we just saw, and we should be able to like figure out how it could become Azor Ahai, or you know what I mean. The last,
Absolutely.
like, you should be able to check off the boxes, because that's what I believe happens. People are like, all right, we need a mythical birth. All right, so there was some blood, and there, you know what I
Yes.
mean. You got to be able to check those boxes. So it's like, how do they equate this situation? So the Grey King, like you said, like there's pragmatic and practical reasons, pragmatic approaches to these scenarios that would have to be taken. In the Grey King, maybe it was, I mean, that would make sense that he got this big name because he was going over to the north, and he was prevalent over there, and King of the Sea, and sinks a ship, Daga, Naga, sorry. Um, so I find it very fascinating. Remember the voyage, people. Yeah, I mean, it's gonna be. I again, that on that panel, I said it a few times. I'm worried, because I don't think that you should take monomyth like this and give us a literal interpretation of it, because it's monomyth.
Oh,
Like, you know what I mean?
yes.
Like, that's the, like, I'm fully, like, I said that, like, I don't know how I feel about him taking the like, it's because it's literally constructed to be something else. uh so
Exactly.
it's like
It's
that's
something
so
that it's a
weird.
puzzle. It's a puzzle that you have to figure out, that you have to study. It's something that you have to analyze and take apart and look at from, 20 different angles, and try and identify um, the similarities, try and identify what connects what, in order to
But is there any reality, Amanda, that you can think of that fulfills like your expectation for the mono? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's because
mhm.
every single
Yes,
one is going to be like a letdown. Is my point? Like, Brand the
yes,
builders, Brand the general contractor, and you know what I mean.
yeah.
Land the clever might just be a shithead shyster. I don't
Well,
know. That
Well,
might.
one of the coolest things that George R. R. Martin said is the only story, and he's basically subquoting Faulkner, the only story that's worth being told is the human heart in conflict.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I was able to identify specifically that is being purveyed in many of these myths is the fact that there are two brothers that are fighting. And not only are they fighting, but we have two brothers fighting over one woman. And so, if we do get this prequel, I am going to say it now, that, and I am saying this with 100% certainty, that if they are trying to project what George R. R. Martin is providing in these myths, we are going to have two brothers, and there is going to be a woman in between them. Um, but
I can't
go ahead.
disagree. No, no, but I don't want to interrupt. Yeah, I definitely agree, because George is always, you're right from what you know, and George has had a few of those himself, and he tends to always inject them. I mean, where do we not have a triangle, right? To some extent, within this story. So I'm definitely with you. Yeah, and he doesn't even. Yeah, he's just straight up quoting Faulkner. He loves. I mean, you can't get any better than if you're looking for the internal struggle, which is what it's all about. That internal making that external just a a little bit harder. But no, I love the idea of this. I'm excited for it, and I know that they're trying to have a sandbox situation. This definitely is one. But again, like something the left better unseen, unsaid. So it's like I don't know. Maybe it'll just be just completely different than I'm envisioning. But it's like if we get a literal telling of Bran the Builder, it's rough. You know what I mean? I think that's a rough sell.
Oh, yeah.
It's a weird sell, but that seems to be the pitch, right?
Yeah. So it's hard to really identify. Bran the Builder is one of those ones that is really, really hard to look at. It honestly, it's easier to look at Brandon of the Bloody Blade than to kind of pick apart Brandon the Builder, because he is supposedly traveled to many, many different areas and helped build all these different things that, like we mentioned in the panel, are very different in construction. And so we see different evolutions in building materials and building construction. And it really makes you wonder, did he actually build that? And George R. R. Martin has stated in an interview that one of the things that he has done with the Brandon the Builder myth is he has built this mythical character that people in societies can just take a look at this big, huge structure and be like, oh, and attribute it to that one guy. So that one is a little bit more difficult to understand.
Garth
because
is rough too.
Oh no, Garth is not as rough.
Well, it's still rough to explain away. But my point is that they were constructed as monomyths, but they didn't become monomyth as monomyth becomes in culture. George looked at culture. He's well aware of what really happens and created his beautiful, namesakes and claim the fames for all the great houses, because nobody can just have a Joe Schmo. You got to be from some great line, so it's always been a very, I was very happy to do the panel, but it was something I was struggling with the whole time, even on it's like, it's so weird that he's choosing to deconstruct the very thing that he built. He didn't build this, like he built this for the reason of it being monomyth. Like he didn't construct it didn't come to fruition like over time, because they're not real people. So it's like, it's a very weird thing to do because it serves a certain purpose, and that purpose is exactly what you just said. So it's like, I guess it's still fun though, because I can definitely see ways to explain away, we know how they do. Like you just kind of explain how it could happen with Dany. There's definitely ways, like how he could be somebody. His journey takes him, far and wide, and he learns different crafts, and then he has a huge impact on society and people. It's the I am Spartacus thing. Everybody embodies him, and his name gets put to it because, again, spoken word and things build up. I'm just saying that I kind of like the idea of Bran the Builder. Not that I'm well aware that George didn't create him trying to trick us to think he literally did that, because if he did, he would have to be some type of god, right? He couldn't do storms and Winterfell. The wall, the wall itself is a project that he wouldn't be able to do. It's insane. So but it's kind of cool to have those people, and again, it's like sometimes it's better, I don't know, the mystery box is shut on that one for me. But prove me wrong, I guess. It's not you, but them, or anybody. It's not hard to prove me wrong. So you know what I mean. But it's but you don't think Garth is a tough one to pull off as well?
No, well, the cool thing about Garth is that we are given a lot of content, a lot of information about him, and so with many of the myths, when we get just very basic one-liners, it can be very difficult to ascertain what is actually going on in that myth. But when we are getting several different variations of stories, that's when the real analysis can happen. And so it's, we're getting different descriptions of him. Some say that he had green hands, green hair, green skin overall. Some say that he had antlers like a stag. And then when we take a look at the storyline, we see that the green men of the God's Eye, which are literal green men, also might have antlers like a stag. So what we're seeing here is we are getting this connection between this mysterious people of the God's Eye and Garth the Green Hand right here. And then there's also just a throwaway line about the green king of the God's Eye or something like that. And so you're like, oh, well, that's going to be Garth. Like you can start to do really basic things like that. Then when you do the mythical analysis, we literally have, and it said that Garth was like a fertility god type of a figure. We actually have a fertility god with green skin with antlers like a stag. So we see that is what the ladies like. I'm telling you right now, get the green dye out. It's not a green thumb that they want. They want everything else green too.
It's ridiculous.
No,
that is so George, right? Though, to put in that whole thing, like I said, it's like, oh, okay, that can't be. Oh shit, he's like, did you hear about Schma over there? I'm like, oh, you son of a bitch. you put in a real thing that I can't prove around, didn't you? He's like, yep. So yeah. I mean, it's I guess that his I mean, because he's just embracing the vibe, the love. I love the juxtaposition that you did with the Grey King and him. Really, really good stuff, but I guess really the best one, the easiest one to pull off is, I believe, Lynda Clever as a person. I kind of see Lynda Clever as Owen Tudor. Owen Tudor was, that's where they, like, if you ever look at the bloodline, it veers off from York and Lancastrian, in the Owen Tudor sneaks in there, like curbs on in all sharp, when he was a Stuart or whatever you call it. He's pretty much, the Queen's good time. So it's not it wasn't,
well, there you go.
He snuck in, he slipped in, he was a lusty man himself, in that Henry never liked to, they didn't like, they had to have some connection, so they did it there. They didn't Uncle or Grandpa Owen, get with Queen, it was one of those things, like, just draw the line. Everybody hates it. But like Lynda Clever, I mean, but then he has these like hoodwinks that are just out of control, right? I mean, even with Garth. So it's, I don't know if we're gonna have a show full of like a whole bunch of like demigods. Like it's gonna be Clash of the Titans, right? Or if we're gonna have this grounded, excellent story that we're so used to, that gives us a real telling of legend, which it wouldn't be far off from what we've got. I just, I don't know. Maybe it's like the messing with the pre-created ones. It's like, you already cooked those ones, George. Don't unbake them, man. So it's just me being neurotic about it, but I think that's what he loves. Like, and I think that with his obvious enthusiasm and how much more the Iron Islanders, like we said, have been built upon since Feast, that I think that it would make sense for him to further justify the amount of chapters he's given to them, out of nowhere, in some senses. With giving the Grey King some shine, right? Because I mean, they're very prevalent in the novels, so and they weren't prevalent in the first two. So I mean, they're there, but not to the extent they are now. I mean, do we have just as many POVs from them that we have Lannister, right?
Well, since the publication of like Feast Dance, it has, the amount of Ironborn chapters has just increased and increased, and they are becoming much more prominent and much more significant within the storyline. Now, I haven't done like a one-for-one analysis of how many POV chapters, versus these people or that people, but it is very, very certain that we are getting more and more POV chapters. And not only that, but George R. R. Martin actually, so when the series was fairly young, George R. R. Martin did something with I think it was the Daenerys chapters. And he originally called it The Blood of the Dragon. Mm-hmm. And it was just all those chapters just together, and they were published within a Sci-Fi Fantasy magazine, and so you could read all of those chapters kind of like together, and it was like this thing called The Blood of the Dragon. Well, not terribly long ago, after the publication of Dance, George R. R. Martin did the same thing with the Ironborn, and it was called The Sons of the Kraken. Oh. And so and so
2011 for Dance.
Yeah. So it wasn't like that long ago that George R.R. Martin decided out of all of the chapters that he wanted to kind of publish in this sci-fi fantasy magazine, he wanted those chapters. And he put it, in the similar fashion that he did with the Daenerys chapters.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you can take it with a grain of salt, but I think that it kind of speaks to the significance of those chapters that he used them to highlight his work.
Yeah,
within that
I think
magazine.
that he falls in love with certain threads, and he in it he doesn't, he clearly, I've always said his method of writing is not the most efficient, but it is the most proficient. It is the best story once you get it. It's not necessarily suited for writing the rest of these books, to be honest with you, because he is enthralled with I think he just goes down a path and you can see it and it's beautiful, and he doesn't want to go and close up the other ones. It's not because he doesn't know how, it's because he's telling. I think I sometimes wish that he would just separate a lot of the POVs to novellas, in have, because I truly think that's like what's best about it, and I enjoy the hell out of it. But putting those, I mean, he had the split. Okay, when you have to split a novel because your POVs can't, because I've said this before, it's very much so different with screenwriting than it is with changing perspective than it is in a novel. You can go pretty haphazardly from POV to POV in a novel. It doesn't necessarily need to flow as well. It needs to, there's a lot of nuances that go into changing whose perspective you're in on the television show for the screenwriting than there is in a novel. So when you had the split, feast to dance, you know what I mean? Like that, that shows right there that he's just loving and falling in love with certain, and obviously he needed those, he wanted those 5 years. I'm like, time stone, make a time stone, George, just do it. It's cheap. I'll forgive you. But it's just that right there is a good sign for anybody that thinks that he had it all planned out. I think it's not downing on him. It's clear that he didn't. First off, he thought it was going to be a short story or a poem. It's clearly not that. And he was sitting there and he wanted 5 years for certain characters, obviously the younger characters. So it's like it's a process that's always working and it's always turning up there. So like Damp Hair, Victorian, Euron, like all those have like really elevated, right? And we've got in this vivid depiction of the Iron Islanders. We've got in a prophet. We've got in maybe a king. Well, yeah, technically a king of the Iron Islanders and a warrior, right? With Victorian. So it's like, we've gotten like more dimensions from them and layers than any other society, and I guarantee you, in there, it's not a bad thing. It's just that wasn't the plan. It wasn't the plan. He needed time for those other characters, so he built a story around others, and I think that that's where you get a lot of people just adhering a lot more grand outcomes for Euron than I believe to be happening. I just mean that in the sense, like I mentioned earlier, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but it's not not that it doesn't mean anything. It's just that he's not going to be sitting on the throne, or he's not going to kill be the new Azor Ahai, or because nobody will be, but even have the actions that he could be attributed to that. I'm sure people will speak about him for sure. He's epic as can be, but yeah, I think people mistake the fascinating stuff that George does with them, in the sense of he's exploring the culture and he's exploring the ultimate outsiders that are, their agenda is so vastly different, and so they have to go about things in such a distinctly different way. They're not part of the mainland. They're not part of the jostling of the mainland. They're completely different. It probably feels like a fresh story for him, because it is. And that's what it feels like now that I've gotten into it. Like I went back and I've read chapters, because I don't think, I particularly don't like dance, to be honest with you. So
what?
I mean, yeah.
Say it's so. I love dance.
No, but it's nothing wrong. I don't think it's bad storytelling or anything. It's just I'm honest. I mean, like, it's not my.
Not your cup of tea.
No, and I don't. I like it. I'm just saying, these are, when I'm looking at a saga that I love, I've been reading the Saxon stories. I gotta tell you, I can't. And George loves them too. Read his blog, from Bernard
Oh,
Cromwell.
yes.
Beautifully depicted battles. Not nearly the layering that George has. I won't go off, but I mean, I'm not afraid to say. I think some people sometimes afraid to say it. It's like, man, when I started making content, I had to go back and read Dance again and force myself, because I was like, okay, if I'm gonna make a video on it, like, I need to make sure you know what I mean. But it was like it was like a labor a little bit. It wasn't the worst thing in the world, but it was like, all right, I kind of fell asleep during that audiobook a few times and didn't make an effort to get
Oh,
back a few chat. But I mean, I'm
no.
talking like years ago. But so yeah, I mean, if you needed me to go read Dance again, like I don't know, for a panel I would. But yeah, it's not, you know what I mean. But I can read Clash of Kings. Like, I'll start, I
Oh,
love
yeah.
it. Yeah, like, it's preference. I mean, so it is what it is. You ain't gotta. He's not sitting around. He's like, oh, Justin doesn't like me. That Justin. Oh, man. Yeah. So, let's see. Yeah, I want to thank everybody for stopping by, and thank you so much. And yeah, Florida for the next con. I accidentally joined that bunny. I don't know what that is. I heard it's
Oh,
a Playboy thing. I didn't know that bunny
oh,
hitch
okay.
con. I was invited to the group, and then I was just posting regular con stuff, and then they're like, you know what that is, right? I was like, no, and then they explained it. I'm like, oh, I respect that. I'm not gonna do it, but I feel foolish.
Oh, so here, okay, sure. I'll talk about that for a second. So the bunny hutch is something that is not uncommon in con culture. The biggest one is actually over in Dragon Con, and I attended Dragon Con's bunny hutch just this past for 2019. And it was a lot of fun. And Con of Thrones actually had a bunny hutch the year prior, and everybody talked about it. I didn't go. I didn't know when was happening or even what it was when it was going on. Um, but people just came back and they had so much fun. I was like, oh gosh, I want to do this. And I heard Dragon Con had one. I went to that. It was a lot of fun. And then now this year, the people that were doing the bunny hutch last year, the timing for Con of Thrones in San Diego Comic Con is like really close together. It's like we have Con of Thrones, and then the following week is San Diego Comic Con. So they were kind of stretched for time. So they kind of decided to pick one. And so they are not attending this year. And myself and some other ladies volunteered to organize this year's Con of Thrones Bunny Hutch. And so I'm actually one of the organizers for that.
Because you
So
invited me to the group, so I just thought it was
yeah,
something
yeah,
for
I
me.
invited all my
Yeah,
friends.
and I'm not like so I understand that it is
Mhm.
Playboy bunny esque, but it's in cosplay, and then the guys are dressed like in is
Like
am I,
Hugh Hefner.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong, and
Mhm.
like I've never cosplayed, but I'll tell you what, like any more interaction, like I only had that one panel, so like I really realized at my first con that panels are the way to connect with people that aren't content creators. Even though obviously you saw me, I had a really good time with the content creators, but like I looked at those cosplayers, group photos and like all those events, and I was like, oh man, like I would like, I don't even know if I'd dress up, but I would like to attend, because that is
Yeah, you
such
can
a,
still attend.
yeah.
There were people,
I mean,
there are
I'm rare
people
to
that
go, but
show
it's
up.
not like a thing. Like, I'm not like,
Uh-huh.
oh no, you know what I mean. I was a DJ at a
Yeah.
strip club. This is like kindergarten. I was just on. I felt silly because I was, I didn't know what it was, and I was a part of it.
Oh, no, that's
I
okay.
felt ignorant. So I
Oh,
was,
don't feel ignorant.
yeah. Well, I mean, not for that. So I guess, you know
So
what I
don't
mean.
feel, don't. But yeah, yeah. So if you decide to come, you're gonna have a great time. It's gonna be a lot of fun. Those people that are doing bunnies, they put a lot of effort into their cosplays and their costumes, and they look amazing. And yeah. If you
And
get
so,
the
but
opportunity,
do
show
they
up and have fun.
they do the Game of Thrones theme with the bunny, right?
Yes. Yes. So we'll have a Marjorie bunny, a Sansa bunny. I'm doing Wind of the White Fawn this year.
Mm-hmm.
That there's going to be all different kinds of variations. Some ladies are doing house sigils, so they're going to have a house sigil theme bunny. So you'll have like a House Stark, House Mormont, House different, the different houses.
No phrase.
What's that?
phrase.
You never know. There might be
No, I see how
be.
niche it gets. I mean, I think that's
It
part of
gets
the
very
game.
niche.
There's the
Yeah.
people that I saw at the cosplay that like to be very authentic. There's the people that like to be sexy, which I got. Hey, God bless them all. And then there's the niche people. You know what I mean? It's how do you stand out? It's like, are you niche? Are you sexy? Are you all? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Are you like? Are you dressing up like the one Frey that nobody knows? You're like, I'm, freaking Larry Frey.
Yeah, I'm basically going to be doing that. I'm doing a very obscure a Song of Ice and Fire character that is definitely not in the series and is only mentioned a couple times within the books. So, but she's totally cool and she's got great accessories. I've already got my deer brand. So, so that I can brand the arses of unsuspecting victims.
You hear that, guys? You hear that? See, I mean, come on. I mean, it's gonna be a hit. So yeah,
it'll be fun.
I'm going as a bunny. I'm gonna be confused, and I'm going as a sexy bunny.
You could totally come as at Dragon Con. They had tons of dudes show up as sexy bunnies, and they killed it.
Yeah.
So you would be a hit if you went.
I used to do the Halloween costume contest at the clubs I did, and it's like all the girl like cops, and then the dudes like that would wear like, I'm like, you're not, like, you can't, there's too many hot cops here. I mean, not too many, but you know what I mean. You can't let them win. You gotta be if you're gonna be like, you gotta be like creative. You gotta be like the hot like orthodontist or something like that. So yeah, maybe people like switch it up from the Dannys and do like a hot I don't know. I guess I don't even think of his phrase, and that sounds disgusting to me. So yeah, no, I definitely appreciated the work they put into it, and it looks like that they have a lot of fun at their competitions as well. So I mean, anytime there's a group of the people from the fandom around, I'm in. No matter whether it's in on a balcony drinking a bunch of booze or hanging out with a bunch of Dannys and Jon Snows and a few Dothraki, I'm in. But yeah, I want to thank you again, and Bunny hitch it up, people. I mean, I don't know, you don't need me pitching that. That's probably going to deter. But yeah, no, thank you so much, Amanda. Make sure let me get you down here. If you guys are subscribed to me and not her, then what are you doing with your life? But let me copy your link and put it in. And if are you doing anything? Are we gonna? I know that you got real life happening and stuff like that. But are you? If you're gonna got any projects coming up, now's the time to share them. Commit yourself now, and you'll have to.
I'm trying to commit myself. I've tried. Oh gosh. So my channel is The Disputed Lands. If you want to look at some nice, cool, interesting Ironborn videos, you can find them there. I've also got some really popular theories on the origin of dragons that people seem to like. You can check those out as well. Life kind of caught up with me, and I haven't gotten to make videos lately. And I've got lots of ideas for videos, and I'd like to do one on the Sigil of House Greyjoy. And I started writing it, but I lost my motivation. So
it's why it's always good to commit. I put out something on Twitter. Like you've seen, I've done 3 videos in the last 24 hours. My sleep is 0, but I set that I was gonna do it, and I'm gonna do it. Now I'm gonna go die for 3 days. But I mean, your videos are so well done.
Thank you.
I do really think that they're history of Westeros level and in Deep Geek level, LML.
Well, that's incredibly kind of you to say.
Well, they're very insightful. They're original. You can tell you're not just spewing the same. You don't do any like red arrows in your thumbnail saying this is what you missed about Game of Thrones. I'm like, oh, did I not understand television? And you're gonna show me something. I'm pretty sure they're pointing towards there with that red arrow. But yeah, no, it's I mean, hey, I'm somebody that has, like I said, like taken a stance with content that I don't obviously do it full time, but when I make a video, I make sure I'm informed. So it's not like I wasn't aware of the Ironborn before, and you got me hooked though. Like you got me going back and reading, and especially the sample chapters have been like really exciting for me now, and I didn't give a crap. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I was like, okay, fine. More wins sample job. I'm putting together the book for you, George. But no, now, I mean, anytime that I always say it's like a sponge, man, and you just got to just squeeze all of the joy out of it, and so my analogy is not a good one, but for A Song of Ice and Fire, and anytime somebody can highlight an aspect of the story that, you might have not really immersed yourself in, and you can find more joy in a reread, or find, maybe I can find joy in dance, even in Essos. God forbid. So, it is what it is. So, yeah, I mean, that's what's exciting about content that, it touches on stuff, I'm aware of the characters. I've read their chapters, but it's like now when I read their chapters, I'm really thinking about what it means. I'm not just getting through it. I'm not just waiting for the next POV that I'm currently enticed with. It's with all of these POV chapters of Song of Ice and Fire. Really, that's what lends it to readability. It's going back once you fall in love or out of love with certain characters. So I appreciate you on multiple levels, and I put your link down there. And thank you everybody for coming. And if you guys are watching, after this is done, make sure to give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below about a live stream you'd like to see. I'll only do Throne stuff if it's worth doing, and can't pass up having I'd pay the iron price. I don't know what that means. Oh, I know what it means, but I'm saying to get Amanda on the channel. So stab somebody, I guess.
Yeah, you don't have to kill anybody.
Yeah, I realized it halfway through. That was a bad claim. So, all right, guys, before I, commit a crime, we'll get off of here. So thank you so much, and thank you again.